Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining, either now or when you're watching the recording. I won't make any crowd size jokes nor memes, Darren. Won't use it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm Caroline Nash, based here in Atlanta. I work with MessageGears partners to basically ensure our clients' success. That means working with tech partners for platform integrations, or working with consultancies like Transparent Partners for everything from strategy to implementation, execution, helping folks move to a composable architecture, and all those sorts of things. So that's what I do here at MessageGears. Darren, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Darren Rankin. I'm a partner of technology at Transparent Partners. We're based in Chicago, but I myself live in Denver and travel to our head office about once a month. Essentially what Transparent Partners does is that we help brands navigate this complex world of technology and data. You really can't do marketing nowadays without a combination of data and the technology, and of course people and process, right? So we help large organizations, or large, small, medium-sized, whatever it is, we help them get the best they can from their martech and ad tech investments to deliver on their business goals.
Very good. Well, you're the perfect guest to have here today then. So I was thinking, Darren, maybe we kick it off just by talking about what we think we mean by composable, seeing if you and I are on the same page, and going from there, and we may not be, and that's okay. So from my perspective, when we hear composable, certainly modularity is, well, it's synonymous with composability, as a word and as a meaning, and I certainly don't have any objections to that, but I feel like the more key function of composability, why we're talking about it in martech specifically, and certainly composable CDPs, is the warehouse native portion and the movement of all the marketing processes that were traditionally done in a packaged CDP, from like ID resolution or any data management, data enrichment, etc., moving that to the brand's warehouse environment. And I feel like some folks out there maybe have co-opted the term composability and just sort of using it to speak of the Lego or modularity or interoperability like aspect, and have sort of glossed over a little bit of the warehouse native. But that's just from my perspective. What about you? Why do you think it's such a hot topic right now? And like, why should we care?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, first of all, right, so we all work in the martech space. And I think every few years, we in the martech space create a new acronym, and we tell everybody that that acronym solves the problem of all the previous acronyms, right? So you go from a DMP, that solved everything, and then we invented the CDP, which solved all the issues with the DMP. Then, come on to the marketplaces, data clean rooms, and trying to figure out where they fit in with the CDP. And now, or almost in parallel to that, is this idea of composability. And you're right, like different people are kind of like taking a different slant on composability. I've seen people position it and say, we're already composable, because their take is that the martech ecosystem is made up of a bunch of different tools and vendors that hook together, so aren't we composable? And that's not necessarily the case. I think when we talk about composability, from our perspective, when we think about it, we think about, we want that brand's data to stay in their data platforms, and we don't want to move it. But also, if that piece of martech could hook into that and not move the data around, we would love it if those martech vendors, if they created data, say like an audience definition, that it would create that data and write it back to the brand's environment. So basically, the brand's data environment is the hub of this composable ecosystem. And when you have those two things in play, it allows you as a brand to kind of plug and play the different vendors. You don't have essentially vendor lock-in. So the reason why it's getting so much hype is that cloud data platforms have been maturing, right? For those brands that started installing or configuring CDPs 5 years ago, maybe longer for some, or maybe in recent years, they may not have had a mature cloud data platform.
Right.
And so a lot of brands now are on, they're on the Azure platform or AWS or Google Cloud platform, and they're leveraging these different data environments, whether it be Snowflake or Redshift or GCP or Azure's versions of those, right? So those platforms have been maturing. And so then the other thing that's been happening is some of the data that's available in a CDP is now available in that cloud data platform. So people are kind of questioning, well, do I need them both? Then the other issue that we always have in our industry, right, is compliance and privacy has been evolving over the last few years and continues to evolve. Different states are continuing to add legislation. And so if you've got a martech ecosystem, which we tend to have, where the data is being passed, your first party data is being passed from system to system, when you're trying to fulfill a DSR, a data subject request, or you're trying to initiate a data deletion, you've got to go through this tangled web. So the idea of having all your data in one place, that appeals to the compliance and privacy officers because it can mitigate risk. The other thing that's happening is that brands are being asked to justify the value of their CDP, which can actually be a really challenging thing to do if it wasn't designed to fit into a measurement ecosystem at the same time. Because a CDP can power that data and it can create audiences and federate those audiences. But as a marketeer, you want to know, like, well, did that campaign work? What was my return on investment? And if the CDP isn't bolted into that environment or playing an integral role of that environment, it's really difficult to justify the cost of your CDP. So then the challenge becomes, if you can't justify the value, people obsess with cost. And they start like peeling the onion, right? Because when you've done an investment, you either look at, what is the value that this cost is returning? And if you can't justify the value, people are like, well, they start pulling at the string of cost. And like, well, what about that cost? So in CDPs, when you license a CDP, you're paying for, the IP, the software of that vendor, but behind the scenes, right? And then behind the scenes, they think, people assume, and probably rightly so, that you're paying for fees to process and store your data. So then the questions come from people, well, am I paying twice? Like, I'm paying to store it in my own data platform, but I'm also getting this CDP vendor to do it as well. And so that's why people start questioning it. So really, just to wrap that question up, the brand Composable is popular because people are starting to ask themselves, should I leverage my own data platform more? And does that help? Is that like a potential for cost savings? It can reduce compliance risk by not having your data everywhere. And it kind of helps with that vendor lock-in that people are getting more and more concerned about, that they want to plug and play vendors and not being, take millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to pull out one vendor and put another one in. So those are the main reasons why it's a popular topic today.
Okay, I don't have any real points of to argue with you, surprisingly, on that one. We're aligned there. But zooming out a bit from CDP specifically, sort of where did the package CDP sort of fit versus when we talk about composable, between sort of the data layer and the activation piece? Is there sort of a framework you can apply to kind of show us where these? Do you have a visual for us?
Yeah, I'll bring up a visual. So when and you can see my screen, just checking, correct, Caroline?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, so when the martech world is really complex. There's lots of acronyms, and all those acronyms are trying to become something else, and they morph. But ultimately, when we talk to clients, we try to break it down very, very simply. We try to say, look, it's almost like a cake. Think about a cake or an onion and say, there's different layers. So at the bottommost layer is is the data layer. That's where all your data resides. The next layer up from that is the engagement layer. Think about that as how a brand's customers engage with them, whether it's through a website, through an app, or a kiosk in a restaurant or an airport, or whether it's making a call to a call center or through a chatbot. That's the engagement layer. The activation layer, try to think about that as mainly the marketing layer for activations, where they're sending emails and SMSs and push notifications. It may be that they're integrating with the website, and that's where sometimes these layers blur, but we're trying to keep it super simple. So the activation layer may be doing some personalization on one of the engagement layer through a website. And then finally, the thing that kind of ties it all together is the measurement layer. And that's key. That's really key for me. I think a lot of platforms don't do a good job of considering the measurement layer, and that's what we have to do. Like, marketeers have to justify their investment, and they have to prove marketing's contribution to the numbers, and so having a really well thought out measurement layer is key.
Another advantage of Composable, that because of that data writing back to that central location, that the measurement layer can live directly on top of that, and then pull in not just from, you know, this system and that system, but have that holistic view across the organization, because it's centralized now into one place.
Exactly. And you know, the other way you could look at this diagram, we're calling out a nice clean data layer that's separate, but really what's happening in the non-composable world is that data is actually in every single layer. It's mixed in, and it's all mixed up. And so what we're kind of like talking about here today is really about separating it out into cleaner layers. If you think about like the CDP, right, the traditional CDP, this is a diagram that's kind of a very typical CDP diagram. You have the CDP at the center. On the left-hand side, you have different sources of data, the brand's first-party data. Any second party or third party they're also getting is going into the CDP. We have the data lake here as an optional, it's like classified as an optional platform, because some brands will send data to their data lake first before they send it to the CDP, but others don't necessarily. Some just send all their data directly into the CDP.
Right, because a lot of people are using this package CDP a lot of times because they maybe didn't have a data lake or some other type of data.
Exactly, that's exactly what happened, right? They didn't have all the data that marketing needed in one place, and that was the dream of the CDP. The dream of the CDP was to pull it all into one place. And then on the right-hand side, you have, you know, all the activation channels, right? You have, you know, sending stuff to paid channels or social channels or own channels. So the CDP is really at the center. And another thing to kind of talk about to help give you some good context is looking at these 6 different capabilities or core capabilities that a CDP provides. And I like to look at this diagram and say, well, on the left-hand side, the yellow, those are the data management things that a CDP does. And on the red side of this diagram, these are all the kind of marketing things that the CDP does, right? So on the left, it's got to ingest that data. It's got to bring it in from different sources, bring it in real time where it's needed. And then you've got all the fun data management, you've got data cleansing, you're putting privacy protections, you're doing a bit of ETL and modification of the data if you need to. But then the real core of that is doing the identity matching, bringing things together, creating that unified ID across the customer profile. And the customer profile is, think of that as, you know, I like to think of that as just like almost like a wide table with all the attributes describing that customer. And then on the right hand side, you've got kind of the more of the fun marketing stuff where you want to create and build and manage audiences. You want to then leverage those audiences in some form of journey orchestration so that you can, you know, send an email and wait a few days and then send a push. And if they don't respond to that, then maybe you go on to do a paid media campaign. And that's kind of all achieved through this activation, which is sending that data and those audiences through to the individual channels that do that last mile. So that's what I think about. Well, like, okay, that's what the CDP is doing for you. And so when you think about composability, you've got to think about, well, if I'm going to move away from a CDP, something has to do all of these capabilities in front of you because they're being done today.
Right. These processes remain the same regardless of the platform, right? Or they're still required. So you just showed us before this a sort of traditional package CDP implementation, or what the architecture could look like. And now we have these 6 capabilities that you just told us, you know, were paramount before and they're paramount now. I have a sneaky suspicion you might, on your next slide, have an architecture of, now let's map this to a composable architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take you on to that next slide. So this is a high-level composable architecture. The thing to call out here is that it's only addressing a few of the layers, right? It's addressing the data layer, the activation layer, and some of the measurement layer, because measurement is a very big topic. And we're not on this diagram showing the engagement layer, which is also a very big topic. And so for simplicity for today's call, I've really just focused on these core components. At the center of this diagram is the data platform. Now, I've used the word data platform because I didn't want to use data lake and data lakehouse and data warehouse and data mart. Just saying, look, this is your data platform.
I struggle with that all the time because I say data warehouse, but I know that like a Snowflake is not just a warehouse. There's so many other capabilities behind BigQuery, et cetera. So I struggle all the time. So anyway, so thank you for clarifying.
That's okay. And so I think about that as the hub. And then round the edge, I look at these as almost like being spokes, and together they make a wheel, right? And what I've done, or what we've done here, is kind of broken off core components. So I'll run through some of them, right? Over here, you have event streaming. So these are technologies that help capture behavioral events from your surfaces. So whether it's a website, an app, or a kiosk in a restaurant, right? That helps capture those events and taking those events and storing them in your data platform. So we're looking at platforms that have, when we talk about composable CDP, it's not just about the CDP. Like you can have a composable philosophy across your whole stack. And so here, looking at tools that can do that, can be an event stream, but have a composable philosophy to it. We have consent management platforms here. So like brands, these tends to be like third-party tools that you buy. And again, you capture the consent, but we would love it if those consent management platforms would write that data into your data platform and not necessarily keep a copy for itself. Over here, the fun one, this is identity, right? And this is where there's a lot of complexity in the CDP world, because the CDP has played a very important role in identity. We've broken them out into 2 buckets. I like to separate PII identity from web identity. So PII is really about how do you join known sources together? And it could be as simple as if source A email equals source B email, that's a match. Well, you can build on that. You can get far more sophisticated. You can use first name, last name. You can use your addresses. There's different IDs. So in the composable architecture, you need something to play this role. On the web identity, this is around, people come into your website anonymously. You want to be able to stitch those where possible with the PII records. And so looking at different vendors that can play this role, they may even have some capabilities to enrich anonymous profiles. On the right-hand side, you've got, this is really important to me, it's just making sure that you have mechanisms to do your campaign performance and your incrementality testing. Down the bottom, this is about, I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about all the fun acronyms, this is about data clean rooms, data collaboration. and different platforms that can play a role here. And then finally, the activation layer. And this is all about having a tool that can read the data without moving it, but also when it creates data, it writes that data immediately back into the data platform to make it accessible. So that's the high level of the composable architecture, and then trying to work out how you transition like from a CDP at the hub to a model like this.
All right, love it. So when you're talking to clients, prospects today, now that you've kind of they've heard about this, they've read about it, they've seen webinars like this, and they're a little composable curious, and they come to you, and you're trying to help them like wrap their heads around how they can incrementally make the move to this sort of architecture. Could you walk us through that conversation? I know that each one is going to, every client's different, but are there any sort of general philosophies or framework you use to sort of, I guess, again, with the title of this webinar around sort of the crawl, walk, run approach to incrementally moving to this composable architecture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, a lot of the brands, when we talk to brands about this, they want to know, well, what are the pitfalls and challenges that we're going to face as we move to this? What are the pros and cons? How can a composable architecture help me become vendor agnostic? But of course, they have all the other questions about, well, what's the costs of this? What are the timelines? And so, like you said, Caroline, it really does depend. Our answer to that brand's question can depend on their architecture and the role that the CDP currently plays. But one of the things that we, as a very high level, if I take you through.
I'll let you get away with it depends. I mean, that's the consultant's favorite answer, but.
It's my favorite answer, right? And it's nuanced. For me, it really is nuanced. I want to really understand that, but as best as we can, I'll walk you through this approach that we could follow with some brands, right? So the first approach is we got this crawl, walk, run just to make it really easy about like seeing where the destination, and then of course off the page you've got like accelerate or fly. But the first phase is really about the assessment, right? You need to. I'm a technologist, right? And sometimes I come acronym up, right? I can talk about tech all day, but you really need to focus on the why and the value. Why are we doing all this? Why are we talking about all these fun acronyms? So over here, it's really important to make sure that you understand what are your brand's business objectives. And then from there, marketing has its own goals and strategies to help with its contribution to those business objectives, right? So now you understand, okay, so marketing's contribution and our strategies to sorting the business objectives are X, Y, and Z. And then from that, you can decompose that into like requirements or needs. Sometimes those are expressed as user stories and use case, but it's like, what are the features and capabilities I need these platforms to do in order to enact my marketing strategy. And then another good thing to have is what we call design principles. And these are principles that may be mandates from executives, something that's going to affect your design. So for instance, recently I heard from one of the brands that I work with that they had a design principle of they want to be vendor agnostic, right? And I think that if that is your goal, or it's a core design principle, another one might be, do not move the data more than is necessary. Now, so those are key things. Once you've understood those, your next thing is really to do the assessment, right? You want to assess the technology stack. You want to understand all your fun acronyms, how they connect to one another. You want to understand that data infrastructure and even the data strategy of what data is being sent across all the platforms. What is its granularity? What is its cadence? Because cadence is a really important thing. What I mean by cadence is like, is it moving hourly or daily or monthly or real time? And then once you've kind of got all that, then you can assess then you ultimately, because we're focused here on the CDP, what are the gaps that your CDP has in supporting your requirements and your marketing goals? And so the outcome of that phase, right, is you
Before you jump to the outcome, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to ask, and I'm pretty sure you're implying this through here, but one of the things I always hear, and we advise our clients when sort of the first step in this assessment phase is really to define use cases, and instead of sort of like going out and looking and buying technology or switching technology and sort of reversing and maybe looking at features or functionalities in a isolation, but really it's use case driven. And I think you were saying that by documenting requirements and things like that. But I just wanted to call out that I think that's sort of the money shot, if you will, of like defining the required use cases. There could be the like fundamental, cannot live without ones, and then sort of increase in sophistication and complexity.
Absolutely. The only add to that, Caroline, would be to make sure they're grounded in the marketing goals and strategy, because you could list off, all these fun user stories, like as a marketeer, I want to do X, and as a data analyst, I want to do Y.
Right, 100%.
They got to map back to the strategy, because I could end up giving you a bunch of capabilities that you're not going to use because they actually aren't part of the overall strategy. So you're right. Getting use cases is a core part, and on this diagram, it's just hidden under the word requirements.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, before I cut you off, you're moving to the outcome.
Right. So then, okay, so let's talk about the walk phase, right? So we have a CDP, we've found some issues. How can we ease our way into a composable architecture? Because ultimately, what we're talking about in the industry is getting to the run phase, is having a data platform that has all the data in it, that's real time, being updated, and all that data that's needed for marketing is available, so we can place, my apologies, we can place a CDP on top. And that's not a small undertaking. So what we've done here is said, okay, is there a baby step? Is there a way that we can ease our way into the run phase, something that's a bit more achievable? And so with this approach here, what we're talking about here is replacing functions in this phase, not necessarily replacing platforms. So there is a little bit of duplication here. So let me explain that. The first step is finding a composable customer engagement platform. So finding a platform that adheres to these principles we talked about earlier, that can leverage the data where it sits. And if that platform needs to create data, that it writes that data directly back to the data platform. So finding that platform, picking them. This next step is really key. This is the key step that allows you to make the bridge from your CDP infrastructure and getting you ready for that more robust data platform. What we're saying here is you don't need every single data element, data source available in your data platform. For this first phase, you just need the customer profile. So what we're saying here is make the CDP customer profile that the CDP created, make that accessible in the data platform. And it could be as simple as just having one wide table. So what do I mean by wide table? I mean that you have some elements in that table like first name, last name, email address, a bunch of other identifiers, but then you could also have attributes that are either flags to say they're already in these audiences, or you could have the components that make up those audiences. So the CEP could also create the audience from those individual components.
This is the redundancy piece you were talking about earlier. Like at this stage is where you still have your package CDP in existence, and you're starting to have some of these duplicated functions or redundancies, if you will, as kind of a half step to.
Exactly, it's kind of part of a bigger model that you're almost like duplicating, right? Like you said, we're duplicating the functionality. You're replicating some of those features, some of the CDP marketing features inside the CEP. And then eventually, we'll talk about that in the run phase, you're getting on to deprecate. So in here, after you've kind of done this, you're now migrating those core functions of the CDP to the CEP. What does that mean? Remember the red diagram earlier where I said like it's about the audience management, the journey orchestration, and the activation? You're taking those away from the CDP and you're moving those functions or enabling those functions through the CEP. And that's what it says. The ultimate outcome of this phase is that you've moved those marketing functions from the CDP and they're now being performed from the CEP. And this whole phase allows you to step into that architecture without having to take on every single one of the components that I talked about earlier.
Right, and I imagine this phase is going to look a little different, just as we were talking about before. Some people maybe didn't have the data warehouse and the marketing group was completely dependent on CDP and what was happening. Maybe there's some others are the opposite who've never invested in a package CDP and have the warehouse, but they just maybe haven't been using it, or in both cases haven't used it for marketing. So I could see where this walk stage could, obviously, like to your point before, it could look different depending on the situation. But regardless, whether it be if you're there's a redundancy with an existing package CDP, or you're starting from scratch as far as you're, having even this modern data environment available to the marketer. But the thing in common is just that that simple customer data table being established in the data warehouse, and the details on what systems you may be phasing off of may be different depending, but that seems to be the commonality across.
Exactly, and I think that's why I did that typical consultancy answer earlier of it depends, but you kind of narrowed it down just to that common thing there is having your customer profiles available in the data platform. And like I said, it could just be simple as one table.
Didn't have it all to start, but start simple and start getting underway. That makes total sense. All right, tell us about Run.
So Run, so this is the phase that where what you have to do is all that data that was available or pulled together by your CDP, you need to now move it. You need to move all those sources or have those sources available in your data platform. Now, the thing to call out here is you can start this phase as soon as you finish the assessment, because the assessment will tell you what data does marketing need, how fast do they need that data or what cadence. So the walk phase allows you that baby step, but it also allows you to buy some time so that you can actually work on this first step here in parallel to the walk phase. So you start moving that data into the data platform. What this is essentially allowing you to do then is that the core data functions that we listed about the data ingest and the data management and the ID management, you then have to move some, if not all, of those into your data platform. And so now the final step when you've done that is the kind of the switch over that your customer profiles that were made available in the walk phase are now being powered by the data platform. And those are, of course, accessible to the CEP. So the outcome here really is you've moved those data functions that the CDP was performing, you've moved those into your data platform, and you've ultimately in a position now where you can deprecate your CDP.
Got it. So what would be some of the key considerations, maybe even gotchas or things to look out for, good and bad, for a brand considering this?
So this is the final slide, right? So on this slide, you talk about like what are those key considerations that you think about when you're doing this. You obviously have to think about cost, right? You're paying for your CDP today, it costs X. And as you move into this composable architecture, you have to look at like what is the cost of doing that migration? What is the cost of the new platforms? And there's a whole bunch of other considerations down below that I'll kind of delve into. So cost is important, and also making sure that as you build out this composable architecture, making sure that measurements, the ability to measure marketing activations is built into this architecture as much as possible. That way, you'll avoid one of the pitfalls some brands have today, where they're finding a very, very hard time justifying the CDP. The other key considerations, I kind of alluded about this earlier, is marketing is powered by data, and understanding what data they need and having it in the appropriate format, having it cleansed, having it of an appropriate quality, and making it accessible based on the needs. So like, not everything needs to be real time, but certainly some things do need to be real time if you're doing a web page personalization. So having a data strategy and understanding that in detail is really important. The next one is really about operating model. And so, you know, if you have a CDP today, somebody's operating that for you, right? Whether it be employees or an agency or some service provider, they're operating that platform for you. And if you're going to go on this journey of composability, you have to think about, what is the impact to my operating model? Are you going to request new headcount? Are you going to need new vendors if you're moving away from one platform to another? How are you going to manage that new platform? If you're
in marketing, and marketing's always owned this package CDP, and now you're moving to composable, and in your organization, IT or data owns that warehouse environment, that data platform. Yeah, if you're not working together, or figuring out who's going to help service the marketing group around that, absolutely. I think that's something that that we see a lot, and but also a shift now to where those groups seem to be the organizations that are successful are the ones where those have come together organizationally, not just from a platform.
Oh, 100%. I think that even with CDPs, you know, in our opinion, when you were putting CDPs in place, you had to work as an organization to make it work, because they crossed so many teams. And that's the same with this, right? To be successful, this is not like a one team sponsored event. This is a thing that you're doing as an organization. So you're right, Caroline, you have to be working across all the different teams. And that's why, just going on to that obvious point that follows on next, then change management is key, right? You're going to be changing processes. You've got these different roles, the responsibilities are changing. So having some form of change management in place to help you is going to be key. And then the final point is having those guiding principles or design principles, because these will affect how there's some of the decisions that you're going to make. Like I said earlier, one of the brands that I was talking to said, well, we want the ability to be vendor agnostic. Well, and you know, the other one might be that we want to minimize our data risk by not having our data move everywhere. Those principles are going to help you design the best solution for yourself. So the other thing that I like to do with those is, it's very easy for a consultancy company to come in and look at someone's architecture and say it's wrong and these are your issues. But if that brand also had, oh yeah, this is my infrastructure, but these are also my design principles that we agreed upon when we put this in place. Because if you don't have those anymore documented, it's kind of easy to say, oh yeah, this doesn't meet, because you're really comparing the old infrastructure against today's design and guiding principles. So those are the key considerations. I'm sure there are more, Caroline.
No, that's great. That's great. Perfect. And looks like we have about like 4.5 minutes left. So I figured if you're okay with it, we could jump into Q&A. There's only a couple questions that have come in from attendees. So if anybody else out there has a question, please throw it in. But so let's get started. And this was one that I was going to ask or underscore ask regardless, and somebody else has asked it as well. So good stuff. And that's just around like, who is in the brand, like which type of organization maybe better suited for the composable architecture versus another. I mean, and that could be things like, are they B2B versus B2C, or vertical, or it might just be more of a broader like data maturity sort of aspect, or all of the above. But I'm wondering if you could kind of summarize maybe some characteristics of somebody that's just absolutely ripe for this, and then maybe some characteristics of some that is maybe not for them, and maybe or not today.
Yeah, that's a tough one, I'll be honest, because unfortunately I am going to say it does depend. I think that the ones that are in a position to move to this more easily than other organizations are ones where their cloud data platform is maturing. Those are the brands that are kind of pushing on these points more and more. So if you are at a brand that doesn't have that cloud data platform today, then that is kind of a big barrier. But we did kind of outline in this presentation about how, there's a stepping stone to that, which is just having that that wide customer profile. I think from a vertical perspective, there's different brands, right? Like, so healthcare companies are more, very, very concerned about privacy and compliance and data protection. A lot of brands are, but they, that might gear them towards, not moving the data anymore, because as this idea of composability broadens, more vendors are going to build this capability into their tool, which is going to allow more flexibility. So I don't think it's, for me, I don't think it's down to one brand. I think that the other thing you have to consider is resources, like how you structure. There are some organizations that kind of like outsource everything. They've got a very small central team. So for those organizations, having a key partner, I think also just having somebody that's kind of can give you an independent point of view. So if you go to a vendor who sells a tool and you ask them, they're going to give you a solution that's geared towards their platform. As hard as they try, that's what they're in the business of doing. So I think having an independent shepherd is also good.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that a moment ago you touched on security. We really didn't hammer on that point here today, but I think that's certainly worth, even if it's us ending today's call on it, that keeping data at rest behind your firewall, your PII remaining behind your firewall, and that brand's data environment is key, and is going to become more and more key as different regulations come into place. So we definitely think about financial institutions, healthcare, any highly regulated industries caring about that. But to be honest, I mean, some of the most secure, sensitive organizations I've worked with have been retailers. So,
and actually, one thing just made me think of something, Caroline. I would ask, is this right? This is right for anybody that has some issues with their current infrastructure. This is something they should at least evaluate or consider.
Sure. See if it can solve some of your existing pain points.
Exactly.
Well, we're at time. There was a couple more questions, but I think that the content has been covered, and we could certainly follow up one-on-one. And that brings me to wanting to let everybody know, whether you're just watching this in recording or live, but anybody that registered, we'll make sure that we put Darren's LinkedIn and email address and mine in the email follow-up, so everybody will know how to reach us if you have any questions.
All right.
All right, Darren, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Bye.